So tonight, I don't have anything to read to you, but I wanted to show you the paintings I've been working on. I know you all have seen these in my feed, and you've seen them on, all my pages. But I started working on these right after my birthday, so it was like the first couple of days of March. I started painting these. Each one is a different place. And I was getting overwhelmed with, obviously, the pandemic, the news, human suffering, and at first, I was painting things, just painting, whatever came out, kind of just letting it flow, and a lot of them were global, and I kind of have looked back through the news and the dates that I finished them, and I realized that I would work on these in the middle of the night. I still do. I'm working on this series in the middle of the night. Then I'll go to sleep. I'll work for a few hours on one, maybe start another one, prep a paper, go to bed, and when I wake up, I name it, I title it. So these are not painted, with the exception of one or two, they're not painted with any specific place in mind. They were painted, I was just kind of letting the feelings I was having come through me, and very roughly into shapes on the paper. The first one I painted is this one. These first ones are 18 by 24 inches, and this one is called Milan. After I painted it, I woke up in the morning, and the first thing I saw on the news, or read about in the news, was that the death rate in northern Italy was up to 7 or 8% from the coronavirus. And this was very early on, remember, this is like the first week of March maybe. So it was right when it was first starting to hit Italy and get really bad. In these paintings, a lot of the times, the color is sort of symbolic. So the yellow, in almost all of these, the yellow represents the virus. Red would represent suffering. So this one has, in the suffering, it's the Red Cross. It's the medical workers that are suffering, and so many of them were dying. Black, brown, all the way through to like a blue-black represents people. Light blue represents either medical equipment or protection or air, breathing. And straight black, like just really solid darkness, represents death or control or authoritarian things. So this, and green represents, of course, greed, the economy. So this one has almost no green. There's no green in this one. There was no money. There was no economic arguments. It's just medical workers in pain, the illness everywhere, and people obviously dying and going to this place, whatever this place may be here, where they're headed. It's light blue, so I like to think it's a good place, and that's Milan. That was the first one I painted. The second one I painted, this is Seattle. It is called Seattle. And again, I painted it all night. When I woke in the morning, there was a email that one of the infectious disease doctors we had met while Phil was getting his bone marrow transplant had died of coronavirus. So this is dedicated to him. Obviously there's money, but the the money, the economy stuff is just starting to show up, and it's suffering. It's rooted in suffering. It's backwards, and it's pain on this side here. And then we have a medical or protective figure who's dying. He was a doctor. He was an infectious disease doctor. I also have these shapes on this one that I think the things I was reading that day were all about how we don't have much time and we have to act before this gets bad and that sort of thing. And so these little hourglass figures on this side of the painting sort of represented that feeling to me. So that's Seattle. Then there was the third night. There was a doctor in Iran, who was working on patients with an IV, and she was COVID positive. I actually painted this because there were so many news stories about medical workers dying, and the next morning there was a story about her working with patients until she died. She worked up until she was dead. She stayed on her feet working with an IV in her arm, working on patients. So this one was dedicated to her, and this is Iran. And again, you can see, these red figures that were in pain, sort of rising. The next thing would be this one. Johannesburg, South Africa. They decided to round up the homeless and imprison them. So these people were imprisoned. They were not sick that they knew of. They were not tested. Hundreds of them were rounded up and held in prisons to get them off the streets to prevent the spread. But they were taken without consent and without testing and put into a very enclosed space with no protective gear. I'm not currently aware what's going on in South Africa, but this was the news that day that I found that touched me, and I feel like it spoke to this piece. These are people. All of these hands, they are people. And they have the red mark, the red band sort of suffering on them. They're in pain. And they're being sent to a place where it's, this little bit of air, medical treatment possibly, but they weren't getting it. It was just all the virus, all the yellow background. And I feel like these shapes, these prison bars and sort of broken shapes were very apt for that story when I read it. So that's South Africa. The day after that, I had done 2 paintings that night then, after that. I did these 2 paintings the same night. It was a long night of work. And the first one is Rikers Island. Rikers Island is a holding facility, a jail, not a prison. It is where people in New York go before they are convicted of crimes. Everyone there is technically innocent. And I read, this one was actually painted with Rikers Island in mind, because I had read that Cuomo was having prisoners in Rikers Island, slave labor. He was having them produce hand sanitizer because there was such a shortage of hand sanitizer. So here we have the island, the prison, and then we have death descending. The guards brought in coronavirus, and very shortly almost everyone in Rikers was infected. It was a locus of infection. And keep in mind, people in Rikers are, for the most part, innocent. They're waiting for trial, or they're waiting to be moved after their trial. And at the time, trial courts were closed. So people who had committed or were suspected of committing minor offenses even were being held there, innocent, with no trial date. Well, the virus descended on them. it disturbed me a lot. So I painted that one with Rikers Island in mind, and then that same night I painted this. This is Los Angeles. And you can see, this is unintentional. I was intending to make buildings, but it turned out to be a harbor. And it seems like there's a boat. There's this figure of sort of doom coming along with the boat, which is bringing the yellow. It has the infection already inside it. This Los Angeles, the next day I read that Trump was sending the hospital boats. And strangely enough, the day after that, I read that there were already people who were infected on the one that was being sent to LA. So this is Los Angeles. This is the ship going to Los Angeles. I'm going to do one more, and then I'm going to pause, and we'll do more again tomorrow. I want to try to have an exhibit of these, but it's really hard because galleries are closed, or, I mean, even if they were open, I can't go. My partner had a bone marrow transplant. I can't be public right now, so I don't know how I'm going to show these as a group, as a series, but I want to do that before I sell any. A very good collector of mine has prepaid for 2 that she's willing to wait until after a show happens to get them, so that I can have them scanned and make prints available. So there may be a Kickstarter for that at some point. None of that is set in stone yet. I'm not sure what I'll do with the scans or the prints yet. So this one is Tokyo. This is Japan. And I painted this, of course, you know, in the night, in the middle of the night. And then when I woke in the morning, I was reading the story of the Princess Cruise, the cruise line that brought infection to that port. And there was an actor, quite a famous actor over there, who very shortly after died from that. He was infected by someone from that cruise line. And this is dedicated to him. This is Japan. And you can see there's a lot of medical assistance in this one. They were very willing to help people. Like, it's there, but that pain is not preventable. It's come along with it. And at the time, I have it written down, but there were a certain number of deaths already in Japan at that time, and related to this cruise line. And each of these little marks over here represents one of the people who had died at the time in Japan. So that's Japan. Getting close for you. I'm sorry, it's not these marks, it's these. These are people. The last one I'm going to show you, and only really briefly, I'm not going to explain this one, but this is New Orleans. I had to do a lot of math, but this is the number of deaths are in black, the number of infections are in all the colors for New Orleans. This is one of the later pieces. So it's the butcher's bill. It's actually, every mark represents a person. Every black mark represents a person who died at that date. I believe this was in the end of May. This is one of the pieces that's spoken for. It's very bright. New Orleans is very bright, even in the middle of all this. So I'm going to go over more of these tomorrow. There are, I think, 17 or 18 of the small ones. Those are the small ones. The bigger ones are 22 by 30, which is another completely different thing. And the biggest one, I'll pull the biggest one out even though I can't probably get the whole thing in frame. There are two of these. There are two of these that are 36 by 50. You can see how big that is. It's huge. It will never fit on that screen. So when I go over those, I'll be in another room where there's plenty of space. And that was it. I just wanted to show you guys this stuff tonight. And I'll talk to you another night.